Good day, my name is Claire Biesman-Simons. I'm a PhD candidate at Wits University. My presentation today is entitled Teaching and Learning Practices, Creating the Foundation for a Cape Flat School's Culture of Reading. The situation in my presentation is part of a larger study, that of my PhD, and my PhD's topic is exploring the conditions in the field that may make a culture of reading possible. The research site is a school that I've called Saxon Primary, that's a pseudonym. It's a no-fee primary school on the Cape Flats, and it was designated as a coloured school under the apartheid government. In this presentation, I offer a model for looking at the culture of teaching and learning within a school, and this model is constructed by drawing on a review of international and then primarily South African literature. I then apply this model to Saxon Primary, and in doing so I focus particularly on the components of leadership and discipline within the model and how these affect the teaching and learning practices at the school. So my reason for exploring culture of teaching and learning within a study on the culture of reading is clear in this WhatsApp that I sent to my supervisor, which I said, I'm realizing more and more how the overall culture of the school is going to play a big part in my research. One of the grade 6 kids was sent home yesterday for hitting his teacher over the head. I'm still feeling safe in my class, but it really highlights how unrealistic government's expectations of our teachers are and why reading, etc. cannot be addressed until systemic issues are addressed. So before I go ahead looking at culture of teaching and learning, first I approach culture and define it as one's practices, perceptions, thoughts, behavior, habits, and set of values. And then in line with this, culture of reading is a specific set of beliefs and practices held by particular groups of people about reading. So looking at culture from aspect of being a set of practices, a school's culture of teaching and learning will be determined by how conditions within the school create a foundation for teaching and learning, the interrelation between structures, events, individuals, and group habitus and power dynamics within the school, and external influences that might affect the teaching and learning practices in the school. So the model was composed of 8 components within the school's practices, and I look at those first before looking at overlapping fields that also contributed to the model. So the first component I looked at was a shared vision. And in this, it's a focus on successful teaching and learning, and that is shared by all members of the school community, that includes the learners, and that there are systems and practices in place that support this vision. Secondly, I looked at leadership, and I think it's really important to acknowledge the many challenges that so many South African principals face and the huge pressure that they work under. The principal is the primary force behind effective schools and for creating a field that supports collaboration among staff and provides a space for educators' voices to be heard. This requires that the principal is an accepted and respected leader supported by a well-structured management team and educators. He or she models the importance she attaches to teaching and learning and working towards a clear vision and empowers staff to follow this lead. Continuing on leadership, the principal along with his school management team are well prepared for their roles, and this requires access to ongoing professional development, particularly to be offered by the Department of Basic Education, the DBE. Distributed leadership practices, that is to say the sharing of responsibilities with school management team and educators in working towards specific shared goals and a clear vision, are also critical in creating a strong leadership environment. I next looked at educators' roles, and simply the primary focus of educators' roles is teaching and creating an environment where learning can thrive. So in this, educators should be driven to perform and improve learning conditions within the school. And also in meeting their role, it is essential that their physical well-being and mental well-being are looked after. Part of this in looking after educators is that there's a collaborative working environment in place. This should be driven by leadership, and as part of this, meetings and workshops are regular, and the sharing of ideas and best practices is encouraged. There are clear lines of support to access assistance with teaching, content knowledge, and classroom management. I next looked at the learning environment, and here it's important that learners feel supported by their educators and have the confidence to risk making errors in the knowledge that these efforts will be respected. Their curiosity is nurtured and they feel motivated to learn. It's also important that there is cohesion among learners and respect for their peers' efforts and participation within the classroom. A huge impact on the conditions within the school and the teaching and learning environment was discipline and safety. So this includes that learners do not fear bullying and teasing. There is adherence to school and classroom rules, and the classroom is well managed. Learners assume accountability for their behavior and accept the consequences. They feel physically secure both at school and traveling to and from school. And educators feel safe at school and do not fear learner violence. So any environment in which there's much violence and fear, obviously the impact on teaching and learning will be immense, because any fear will reduce your ability to focus on teaching and learning. Looking then at the infrastructure and material resources, a school with a well-maintained environment with sound infrastructure that reflects order within the school and indicates that the school is a valued learning space. And here also teaching and learning materials need to be appropriate to curriculum, respond to learners' interests, accessible to learners so they can't be in a storeroom, and promote learning, curiosity, and enjoyment. And then finally, institutional structures and systems. Educators and learners are at school, they're in classrooms, their punctuality is important, their low levels of absenteeism, the timetable is adhered to, and the curriculum is completed. Now, I had 4 overlapping areas that I looked at. The first was the field of education with specific reference to the DBE, who has to assume responsibility for creating a foundation that enables positive teaching and learning practices. And their role in this is including stuff such as basic norms and standards being met and ensuring ongoing and pre- and in-service training for teachers, which includes support visits. However, more than 25 years since the racial desegregation of schools in South Africa, the inequalities that existed in the apartheid education system remain. I next looked at NGOs and civil society, which within our country, Volmink and van der Els state, the role of NGOs is essential to advancing the national education vision. NGOs here and other partnerships with civil society can contribute to improving conditions within the school and empowering members of the school community. This can be through opportunities for upskilling educators, providing individual educator or learner support, and the provision of resources. Where NGOs come to play a significant part in the school, they can become so fully immersed that they no longer operate as an external influence. I next looked at the community, which is critical in that schools are microcosms of the broader communities in which they're located. So any interaction between communities and schools, which may be through after-school clubs, attendance at fundraising events, and importantly with public libraries, can all contribute to improving conditions in the school. And then within the community, the violence that is experienced traveling to and from school also has a huge impact because of how that then it can affect attendance at school and the level of fear that may impact teaching and learning. And then finally, family, which strong partnerships between parents, guardians, and educators can play a fundamental role in improving learners' education. This relies on educators who parents, guardians who attach value to education, opportunities to learning from a young age, and encouragement for learners, encourage children's learning and supporting them with homework, as well as strong positive interaction between schools and families. And I think also here it's just important to recognize that if this does not exist, this is not a sign that there's a lack of interest from families, but also there are many factors within socioeconomic factors which can curtail the involvement of families and within their children's education. So now, having looked at this model of these 4 overlapping fields and the 8 components, I now apply it to Saxon Primary, and I look at each of these and how it plays out within the school. Firstly, the shared vision. There's an individual educator commitment to learners that is really evident, but is an absence of shared understanding. So teachers have their own strategies and personalities according to one of the grade 5 teachers. Principal says some teachers don't have experience, don't want to change. That's what we're battling in our school. We need to change teachers' mindset, which contradicts significantly with the deputy principal, who says that teachers have brilliant ideas, they're willing to assist learners, and they're doing their best, but they are under such high levels of pressure that just dampen that ability. Leadership, This really played out. The poor misunderstand, as said by one participant, among educators and the principal, undermines staff well-being, collaborations, sharing of ideas. Educators said that they feel ignored, and if they offer suggestions, their responses from the principal are often sarcastic. In contrast, the principal said we need to welcome everything and be receptive, but within the boundaries of observing protocol. So the educators here complained a lot of isolation, hesitation to make suggestions to the principal, and then stated that they feel the SMT is so overwhelmed by managing violence and discipline that they don't want to burden them with further requests. So at the end of the day, grade 5 educators said they just want us to produce, but there's no support from management really. And another educator comment was, I'm not sure how teachers can go about getting support if they have a problem. Looking at the educator's role and well-being, this is a school where the vast majority of educators are dedicated, and they really are focused on empowering learners and carving productive learning spaces, but they're overwhelmed by the constant obstacles that impact their teaching. And some of these here include their frustration that the classrooms are effectively multi-grade classrooms, as the grade 3 educator described. And this is because learners are promoted without necessary intervention or reading skills. When this occurs, no learner in the classroom gets the attention he or she deserves, because stronger learners don't get stimulation that they could benefit from, and the weaker learners continue to be left behind. Classroom management and discipline also affects their ability to teach significantly. Speaking about the pressure that they are under, one educator said, "This is tough, this is major. I'm trying to make a difference. I like a challenge, but it's just too much," with a colleague of her saying the poor teachers must just stay here and be verbally and physically abused. An effect of this is the consequence of this, the health and well-being on educators with educator exhaustion and frequent educator absenteeism. I need to stress that this is really due to exhaustion and well-being, and not the laziness or poor work ethic that is often attributed to South African educators. Now, the collaborative working environment, which adds to educators' well-being, there's a clear sense of feeling unsupportive or nervous of what the responses they'll get to the suggestions. So beliefs such as nobody will back you as a teacher, it's your baby, it's difficult if you are a lone voice, if you put forward suggestions they'll be disregarded and you won't get responses to your proposals. Only one educator reported working with colleagues across grades, and a big thing is that there's no staff room in the school, and educators only see each other once a week for a 30-minute weekly administrative briefing. So they really are educators who don't get a chance to interact and don't know each other at all. Next, the learning environment. Educators were really confident that learners were confident their educators are dedicated to education. As Ketty said, they want to help us, while Sophia said they love us and want us to be something in life. The learning environment really was, more than anything, was the hostility and disrespect that affected the environment that emerged. So Marcel says, sometimes I'm shy when a person reads their laughs and I don't like it, and because of that he won't participate in class. Katie says learners disrupt the class, they can't read, they don't even want to know. The level of hostility really shone through in one grade 5 learner. When I asked her, how would you feel if you were a teacher, she said, I'd kill the children. The children would be my enemy. So there's this constant undermining of peers' practices and efforts that just was I observed throughout the school in interactions within classrooms and outside of classrooms. Looking at discipline and safety, which I've already mentioned was one of the major issues in the school, the ongoing interruptions, fighting during teaching time, other learners entering classrooms, very high noise levels and disruptions while teachers are trying to speak and teach, and a level of fear, particularly in learners in lower grades. So grade 6 educators, speaking of the impact of poor discipline, says, I think discipline also plays a big role, because now you want to read and they're not interested. I have one child, he runs out every day because he cannot read. The grade 5 educator, in expressing her exhaustion, said, it's tiring, it can't all be put on teachers. Management must enforce discipline also. Don't know when that's going to take place. Even if the rules are clear, there's no follow-up from management in terms of consequences. And the impact that fear, not only of being a victim of bullying or violence, but also of witnessing violence and bullying, has really came through in a quote that I've kept anonymous, speaking about a foundation phase classroom. where the interview participant said there are terrified children in that class because they're sitting there and I can see they're terrified, while other kids are punching each other, screaming and running around on the tables, and the teacher's standing there like a deer caught in lights of a car. And clearly in a situation like this, really for effective teaching and learning to take place is not possible. I just want to point out at this stage that that educator was not at the school for very long, and she no longer teaches at the school. The resources and infrastructure, briefly, there's a lot of damage and disorganization. There's some print and murals around on the school, but it was mainly produced by learners from more privileged schools as part of their outreach programs, which has evoked a lot of very justified anger in Saxon primary learners, with Robin, for example, saying, "It's not fair, it's actually our school." There are at the school sufficient books available and materials, but they're not always accessible or distributed as required. So because a lot of educators fear damage to books, they keep the books in cupboards and the children never get to handle them or interact with them. So in my term in the grade 1 class, I never once saw children handling books other than textbooks or the DBU workbooks. Foundation phase learners can't issue books from the library, and all of this decreases opportunities to read for learning and enjoyment. The institutional structures and systems, the struggle to complete curriculum, which is really a result of the disruption to teaching from discipline, and that learners require more support than is available. The high levels of educator absenteeism, which results from their poor well-being, means that learners are split between classes, and this disrupts learners. So I observed occasions when there were 9 learners in one class, additional learners in a class sitting in a small area on a carpet disrupting other learners, and when this occurs, as the grade 1 educator said, the day is wasted. The first field I looked at was education, where the long-standing inequality in South African education really remained apparent. And educators criticized the DBE for a packed curriculum that required too much assessment, too many administrative duties, inappropriate curriculum content, and large class sizes. Secondly, looking at NGOs and civil society, the role of the NGOs in the school was very positive in terms of literacy NGOs. Deputy Principal said that they need to welcome partners because we are very realistic. We know exactly where our weaknesses are. We're not saying no to help. It's why we welcome these groups and must always focus on relationship building. So here there's one literacy NGO offering individual or paired reading and writing support. And as the learning support educator said, there's a vast difference between those ones who attend this NGO program. You will find they have a richer vocab, and I can see the sentence writing. They can actually write simple, basic sentences correctly. I think the most impactful in terms of the NGOs really, and on the overall school's culture of reading, was the library that was established in 2017, which is a collaborative effort between 3 NGOs in the school. Learners and educators are all hugely enthusiastic about this. For Kim, it's quiet with lots of books. A person can concentrate on reading. Bongi loves going there. It's an exciting place because it has books to read. As one educator said, they love going there. They love it, just to give the learners, that learner, I want to read, wanting to read, learn how to read. So what really stood out was the library has created a safe space for learners to enjoy reading and for them to do homework in the afternoons on days that it's open, and it's really the first time that they've had somewhere to read and enjoy books. Looking at the community, I didn't observe any instances of interaction with the immediate community. Most significant was the violence and the learners' fears walking to and from school, which prohibited a lot of after-school activities. So when the library was open or extra lessons being offered, learners couldn't necessarily attend those. Also resulted in a lot of teachers unwilling to teach at Saxon because of their fear of safety, the poor reputation of the school, and not expecting parental involvement. Finally, the family. Educators recognize that parental involvement may be curtailed by socioeconomic factors, but believe there could be greater support for children. As one educator said, we can only do so much at school. If your child don't practice at home, how much can you manage as a teacher? So looking at this model, and giving an overall idea of what conditions are in the school, is the main emergent themes were the effect that leadership and has on the school's practices, and how discipline and violence dominate the practice. Without changes to these and other negative factors in school, reading practices will continually to be negatively affected by the difficult teaching and learning conditions. And I think that this is best summed up in many challenges that educators face in the classroom can result in what Barbara Comer describes as contradictions between the discourse of what teachers want for the literate student and what teachers need to do in order to make the classroom unit behave as a class should. And this really is something that I experienced in my observations and also in the interviews with teachers, learners, and NGO participants. Thank you very much.